Michal despised David. Michal was King David's wife, and when she saw David coming into the city of Jerusalem with the ark and he was dancing, she despised him in her heart. David was, he looked foolish. He was dancing and leaping and twirling and throwing his arms and sweating and stumbling and half out of his mind. And Michal thought he ought to be more kingly, more dignified. And so she despised him in her heart. Michal did not understand that David had a heart for God. He was bringing the ark into Jerusalem. The ark was the presence of God. The ark had been made according to the instructions of Moses, and had been carried through the desert when they were journeying through the desert. It had been brought into the promised land. It had been lost in battle and then recovered, and had been waiting for years on a farm chapel on Abinadab's farm on a hill. It's the ark of God. And when David was anointed king, he made Jerusalem his capital. And he fortified the capital, but he wanted the protection of God in Jerusalem. He wanted the blessing of God, and so he wanted to have the ark of God brought in to the city of David. So he went to the farm of Abinadab with a new cart to bring the ark into the city of Jerusalem. Now, you don't just sneak into the city of God with the ark of God. You've got to have a procession. You've got to have a parade. You've got to make a big deal out of it. The Bible says he brought 30,000 soldiers. I think that might have been a little bit of an exaggeration. Let's say 300 soldiers. And a bunch of musicians. They had lyres and harps and tambourines and cymbals and castanets. I mean, the whole rock band was there. And they went to the farm of Abinadab and they got the ark of God. And so they made a procession to bring it into Jerusalem, and David himself put himself right at the beginning of the procession, and David danced. David danced with all his might. He danced all the way into Jerusalem. He was whirling and jumping and shimmying, and when they came into Jerusalem, Michal looked out of the window and she saw David making a fool out of himself, and she despised him in her heart. Now, you need to understand about Michal. She sounds like a bitter person because she despised her own husband. But she had reason to be bitter. I mean, she was a political wife. I mean, the reason David married her was out of expediency. You know, when King Saul died, David wanted to please all the family and the followers of King Saul, so he married Michal as a way to create a political alliance. So she was just a political pawn, really. And it was just a marriage of convenience. So no wonder she was bitter. A loveless marriage is a bitter thing. So David danced with all his might. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. And David danced with all his might. He looked foolish. Of course he did. You always look foolish when you open yourself to God, and that's what he did. Well, that's what worship is, when you open yourself to the presence of God. The prayer book says that worship is acknowledging the holiness of God. That's what we do when we come together to worship. And David did that. He opened himself to God. He danced with all his might. Now, we Episcopalians don't usually dance in worship. It's tacky. We worry that we look foolish But we might dance inside. Inwardly, we might dance. Our friends in Fellowship Church, they do dance. They put up their hands in the air, and they move their feet, and they move their bodies, and they dance. But it's just not an Episcopal thing. So we don't physically dance usually. But in another way, we do. You know, I've often thought that the Holy Eucharist is a kind of a very slow and graceful dance. Have you ever noticed how we have these sort of patterns that people come in, they sit down, we go through the liturgy? I mean, it's a slow, graceful dance. About 10 years ago, I was in Boulder, Colorado, and I went to the downtown church, St. John's Episcopal Church, with my nephew. And we got there a little bit early, and it was this dance, the same dance you see in every Episcopal church, no matter where you go. Greeter met us and sort of bowed, handed us the bulletin. We came in, sat down. Other people slowly worked their way into the pews. We saw the altar guild lady bring the chasuble over and lay it on the altar rail. And the acolyte came out and lit the candles. And then the procession started with the crucifer and the acolytes and the choir and the clergy. I mean, it was just like the same dance you see everywhere in the Episcopal Church. It was just lovely. So this story about David is really a story about worship. Worship is a dance. Maybe not outwardly, but inwardly. It's a dance. You know that song, "'Tis a gift to be simple"? 'Tis the gift to be simple. 'Tis the gift to be free. 'Tis the gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend, we will not be ashamed. To turn will be our delight, till by turning, we come round right. It's an old Shaker song from the 19th century, and it's in our hymnal, number 554. We still sing it. It's about life, worship, prayer is a dance. And the same tune has been used to create the song, "The Lord of the Dance," where Jesus is the dancer. I danced in the morning when the world was begun, and I danced in the moon and the stars and the sun. And I came down from heaven and I danced on the earth. At Bethlehem I had my birth. So worship is a dance. I heard this story about a rector of a big Episcopal church in downtown New York City in the 1960s. Whenever he got a new curate who just graduated from seminary, first thing he would tell him was to go and take ballet classes. And the seminarian would say, "I just got done with 3 years of studying theology, and you want me to go to take ballet classes?" And the rector said, "I want you to learn how to move gracefully around the altar." It's a dance. Our psalm today is Psalm 24. Who can ascend the hill of the Lord, and who can stand in his holy place? I think every priest asks themselves that question. Who am I to celebrate the Holy Eucharist? And so that's why every priest washes their hands with water before they come to the altar for the communion prayer, to cleanse themselves and symbolically make themselves ready for this awesome task. I've been celebrating the Eucharist for 26 years, and it never fails to give me this sense of awe and wonder when I do it. It feels like to me when I'm celebrating the Eucharist that I'm in the center of the whole universe, and the axis of the universe runs right down through the bread and the wine. I don't know what it's going to be like when I retire and I can't celebrate the Eucharist anymore. Jane Stockwell told me that her husband Norman when he retired as a priest, the one thing he missed the most was celebrating the Eucharist. There's a Norman Rockwell painting you may have seen a copy of. It's called Saying Grace. And the painting shows a crowded restaurant, and in the center of the painting there's this little old lady with a prim blue dress on, this proper little hat, and a little boy, maybe her grandson, 7 years old or so, perched on the chair at the table with her, and they both have their heads bowed and their hands are clasped, and it's obvious that they're saying grace. And across the table from there are these sort of two tough young guys with cigarettes and newspapers, and they're staring at them as if to say, as if there's a big question mark on their faces, sort of like, you mean people still say prayers? And over near the door, you can see a guy that's just come in with his coat on, and he's staring right at the little boy as if he was saying, that used to be me. What's happened to me? I don't pray anymore. So the little boy and the woman are just serene and beautiful in this painting, as if they're at the center of the universe. Do you think there's dancing in heaven? Some people would say no, but I think they're wrong. Amen.